those numbers counting down, that means it's almost showtime here on a Wednesday night. I am Buddy Martin. This is the Buddy Martin Show, plus one. The co-host and star of the show joins us tonight. Glad to have her. I'm sure she wants to do just 4 shows. She's done like 8 today. So what's one more? Alli Peek. Wilbur, good evening to you.
Hey, how you doing?
Sounds like you I'm doing okay. I'm just coming out of COVID. Not feeling much better.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, and but grateful for that. And I caught part of your show and your guest tonight. You can tell us about him. It's always down, no matter what it is, it comes down to when you got 2 quarterbacks and one is getting better and the backup's getting better. There's always going to be, quote unquote, I know it's cliche, the dreaded quarterback controversy.
Yeah. It's not an enviable position for Coach Napier because he's kind of damned if he does, damned if he doesn't.
Yeah. Because, I mean, like, what is he going to do? If he doesn't play and they lose, he gets run out of town, you know.
Yeah,
we'll discuss those variants and nuances tonight in the situation. It is good, though, and really great to have a talented quarterback you can watch play. I know if you're like me, I was thrilled to watch him perform in one of the really great performances, maybe the best opening game ever by a freshman quarterback in Florida.
Yeah, I mean, he in a program that has had a lot of really good quarterbacks and also opened September with a lot of really big cupcakes. The fact that his numbers kind of stand alone, I think definitely tells you something.
It's a whole lot more about than just Sanford because, there's a lot more to it than that. I mean, don't get caught in that trap. But let's do this. It's time for us to roll the open, start the show. At some point, we think David Moulton is going to join us. We're not sure when and where because he's on his phone. And we've got Kevin Brockway, who just did a piece on the 2 quarterback system. And there are those who believe it can and has worked. As we know, one man in particular has stated at the University of Florida.
Yeah.
Alli, you go back a long way, and you have a lot to say about that, too. Happy to have you on the program tonight. It's the Buddy Martin Show. It's Alli Peek Wilbur. Stay tuned. Coming to you live right here on this channel.
Yes, it's time again for Buddy Martin. Call him up and tell him what you're thinking. But be kind because he's doing the best he can.
Better, stronger, faster.
Mama says that alligators are ornery because they got all them teeth but no toothbrush.
Hey, what if the voice calls while you're gone?
Take a message.
Bye.
You ready, champ?
I'm ready for this my whole life.
I'm incapable of small talk. But that's why you love me, right?
Kind of intimidating to be in the presence of so many great athletes.
Welcome to the program. It's Alli and Buddy back again. We're joined by various guests tonight. You never know who might show up. And looking forward to having comments from Kevin Brockway on his series about the 2 quarterback system. I know we've heard. Look, you and I go back long enough. You not so much, but you have it in your family and your heritage to know that it used to be just a 2 quarterback system. Best guy played, just like it is when baseball, when the best pitcher pitches. So we can rest assured that the best player will get to the field at some point because why? They want to win, Alli.
I mean, yeah, I think they want to. I know that they want to win, right? I just think that Napier is in such a tough predicament. If he were to start Lagway after his 1 week against Sanford, which I don't think they're starting Lagway, but if he were to do that, I think it sends the message that he didn't do a very good job evaluating the 9 previous months. And I don't think that's a message that he wants to send. Flip side of that, if he starts Mertz, the leash that he is on with the fans is going to be super small, which is probably not really fair to Mertz. I don't love it when somebody loses their job due to an injury, which is how I perceive this situation, because had he not gotten hurt against Miami, we would have seen him last week against Stanford, and we would have probably seen DJ Lagway for the last quarter of the game, So, if he starts Lagway and loses, you could do some permanent damage to Lagway, both because the offensive line is terrible, so physical damage, but also, to the psyche of a young quarterback adjusting to the college speed. So there's just not really a winning situation for him unless he starts Mertz and they win. I mean, and then he can say, see, I was right, guys. I don't know. Don't want to be in his shoes for sure. Don't want to be making this decision.
It was pretty fortunate to have a generational talent like that.
Yeah.
And if we look at our expectations, what they have been, and we look at what has happened, I never thought in my wildest dreams, and I am a huge fan of DJ Lagway.
Yeah.
I've been from day one, the first time I laid eyes on him. And not even I could have imagined. I don't care who you're playing. If it's routes on air, it doesn't matter, to come in and perform like that. That's a rarity. That's a gem. That's something that you just don't see. I didn't expect it. I doubt you expect it. And I know Billy didn't expect it. So you've got a situation where a young man comes in and immediately responds.
Yeah.
Not only does he respond, he makes spectacular plays.
Yeah.
I don't know what your favorite play was of the ones he had, but of the touchdown passes, one we're all talking about is the one to Aiden Mizell.
Mm-hmm.
The throw that he made
was huge. Yeah.
I mean, and Shane Matthews called it the greatest throw in the history of the swamp.
Yeah, I talked to Shane about that today, actually, a little bit. And I thought it was interesting because he said he'd never seen one of Spurrier's quarterbacks make a throw like that. And he made that smiley face. And he goes, well, that's because I never saw any of Spurrier's quarterbacks in the swamp because I was playing in the league. And he did. I thought it was interesting because he said it wasn't a technically sound throw.
No, his steps are all wrong.
And he's like, but it was, it was so impressive. But, you talk to Shane more than I do. And we both talked to Doring and, other former players who all have kind of said the same thing all summer, which was they didn't think Lagway was ready yet. They felt like he threw a lot of interceptions in practice. He would make a couple great plays and a couple horrible plays, and that Mertz was just kind of more steady this summer. And that every person I've talked to has attributed it to youth and said, like, he is the future. He just, needs a little polish, in a college system. And so I think that's why Mertz got the start this season. I also think there's a great chance that DJ Lagway is just a hell of a gamer. And that's kind of what we saw on Saturday. And I don't know if he'll have that kind of game against an SEC defense. But it was a great performance, and it's exciting for Gator fans to know what the future looks like. But it did create kind of this situation where fans are clamoring for him now. And, it's never a great situation when coach has to decide the old steady guy or the new hot toy, which is essentially the situation. And I think Lagway has the much higher ceiling. I think Graham Mertz has the higher floor. And that's kind of what Billy Napier is currently weighing.
Well, in a game of competition, may the best man always play.
Yeah.
And the question is, who decides who the best man is? How do you quantify that? I doubt a young man could do any better than he did.
Oh, he could have.
I mean, the overcoming part of what he did.
Yeah.
It's his ability to carry the team's confidence, to break from the huddle with confidence, to throw the ball to places you didn't think he could get it, to make a throw like he made over the top to Mizell. I mean, these tired old eyes have seen a lot of quarterbacks making a lot of throws. I know what's a great throw when I see it.
Yeah.
But to be a coach that I know.
Yeah.
And I just was blown away by the Aiden Mizell throw. And I didn't even know what Shane had said. Now, Shane did quantify by saying, A, he hadn't seen that many throws in the swamp because he wasn't around.
Yeah.
And the B, no Spurrier quarterback would have made that throw because his fundamentals were all wrong.
Right.
On the wrong leg, But
Right.
boy, does he have an ability to get a team. Here's the most impressive thing. I just wrote my column about it on Gator Bay. And the fact is that this didn't just happen. This kid was invested in his team.
Yeah.
Big time. And he made it a point to go and get to know the players and know what they liked and know what routes they like. I mean, there were several new faces in there, and he has developed relationships already.
Well, those new faces were the twos that he throws to on a regular basis in practice. So I don't know that I think that it's like so surprising that we saw these new names perform well, because these are the guys that he's comfortable throwing to. It's what he's been doing in practice all summer. I think the thing that stood out to me the most, that I'm really interested to see how this looks moving forward, is that the offense looked different. The wide receivers got separation, and it was just more fun to watch, obviously productive.
Yes, absolutely more fun.
Is that the game was called differently? Is that simply because DJ Lagway is that dynamic of a player? Like, what made it look different? And Shane and I discussed this today. Like, there's rumors that Callaway called the Miami game and Napier called this game. There's rumors that Callaway calls for Lagway, Napier calls for Mertz. Like, we don't know exactly what the truth is and who's calling what, but whatever happened, the offense looked different. And I know it's Samford, and I get that. But we've seen Mertz against some of our cupcakes last year, and he wasn't as productive. Shoot, we'd seen Anthony Richardson not as productive the year before against some of the cupcakes. So what is it? Because if it's Napier and company's ability to adapt, and our offense is just going to be more open, regardless of who's the quarterback, that's an interesting development. Or is it literally that Lagway can make any system look good because that's the kind of player he is?
Yeah, and it's that. It's also, I saw this with Tebow when he first came in the game as a freshman. Immediately the crowd responded, and you could feel his presence.
Yeah.
You knew what was going on. And I also saw players respond to him.
Yeah.
You saw players responding to Lagway like they didn't respond to Mertz.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on in that regard. So I was just I think part of the deal is when it's the old cliche, I know, rising tide raises all ships. When you elevate the play of those around you, like so many great players do, well, then you're going to have different play and look different. Why were these guys suddenly open?
Yeah.
Why were they? I mean, obviously it was part of the competition, but there was he knew where his receivers were, which shoulder to throw the ball over, how to get the ball to him, got it out of there quick. So it was a completely different looking offense with him. And now what that means, I don't know exactly long term. There are those who would say, cut to the chase. It's all well and good that Mertz has been a good soldier, that he has been here and he's played, and he's been his team. But the kid right now has already shown us they're a better team when he's in the game. So I think looks like David Moulton has found us through somehow a miraculous aspect. Look at this. He's in an airplane somewhere. It's a posh jet flying somewhere, going something. David, good evening.
How are you guys? I'm in a badly lit hotel room, so I hope this isn't too awful.
Yeah, not so bad. Not so bad. Looks all right. Good to see you.
Well, what you guys were just talking about, we asked as our poll question on the show this morning, if you were Billy Napier, who would you start Saturday against A&M? And 82% of the respondents said Lagway.
Yeah, and that's something.
Now, I have to admit, Alli, my vote was Mertz.
Yeah.
Okay. My vote is Mertz, and it's because, first off, the level of competition this week compared to last is stunningly different. And secondly, I think this is a very good defensive line. It may not be quite Miami's, but it's in the area code. And I think they need a quarterback who, understands the protections, is, in theory, will get them in the right play calls at the right time. You could always go to Lagway at halftime. Plus, there's a part of me, Alli, if let's just say you were the starter and I was the backup, and you're out a week and I'm filling in, and all of a sudden I start completing passes downfield that you weren't completing, you would naturally think to yourself, maybe I need to throw it downfield a little bit more, wouldn't you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I just, is the game being called the same for the two of them? If it's not, are we calling it because we know Lagway has a higher skill set, which he does? But could we also call some of these plays for Mertz and see what happens? But we looked at it. The offense looked better than it has in years. And again, I know it's Samford, but we've also not looked that good against Cupcakes in previous years too. So I think you can kind of compare that. Somebody made a comment about Chris Leak and Tim Tebow, and I do think about that a lot because, that was Eric's senior year, and Chris Leak was the leader of that team. Chris Leak helped that team win a national championship. And Tebow was a great role player to that team. But if Tebow had started as a freshman, I don't know that I believe that team wins a national championship. The senior leadership of Chris Leak. But that doesn't mean that fans weren't out calling for Tim over Chris the whole season long. And I do, kind of think about that. And I do trust former players that go to practice that say like, hey, his practice has not shown us that he's ready to start this team. Now, he looked like he was ready on Saturday, but I understand why, if that's what coach is watching time and time again, why that is not necessarily the starter. I almost think you go Mertz and he's got a short leash and you see what happens. But it's a tough decision to make,
Alli, I'm glad you brought up Leak and Tebow because, and I'm sure you remember this year vividly, so they are playing Alabama at home, and I believe I don't know if they've lost to LSU yet, but anyway, it's early in the year. They're losing 10-0 to Alabama. I think it's late first, early second quarter, and Leak and the crowd's already murmuring, and Tebow's actually warming up on the sidelines on his own. And Leak throws a pass in the right flat, and Robinson was the name of the DB for Alabama, and it's a pick six. It's over. Leak's going to get benched. Tebow's coming in, and the Chris Leak era is over. And Robinson drops a pick six, a 25-yard walk-in. Would have been 17-0 Alabama. The crowd is calling for Leak to be removed, the whole deal. He leads him down the field, scores. Florida wins the game. Mike Shula's the one that gets fired 2 months later. The Gators go on to win a natty. The line was that razor thin.
I've forgotten that. Yeah. I do
Robinson makes that catch, and it was thrown right to him, and there's no one between him and the end zone.
Florida wore throwback jerseys that game. I remember that vividly. And it wasn't LSU that they lost to. It was Auburn.
Right. And I don't know if that was the week after they had lost to Auburn, or it was just early in the year and the offense wasn't looking good. And it, because Tebow had the big plays in the primetime win over Tennessee, and people were like, come on, let's get him in there. I think it was the week after they had lost to Auburn, and they were one play away from being down 0, and the Chris Leak era would have been over.
And the way that we remember it now as fans is such revisionist history from when we lived it, because now everyone's like, oh, when Chris Leak was the leader of this team and they won a national championship, but that's not what it felt like in the moment. Anybody on that in that locker room knew Leak was the leader and knew that he needed to be the starter, including Tim himself, by the way. but that's not the way the fan base feels. The only reason the fan base is okay with how everything shook out was because they won a national title. But fans were horrible about Chris Leak, and Chris Leak was obviously more successful than Graham Mertz has been. Graham Mertz is a quarterback who won 5 games last year. I think he overperformed from what we expected, even though Florida won 5 games last year. But I mean, Chris Leak is a team that took over our player that took over a team as a freshman and consistently won 8 or more games. So,
right. But the key is what you alluded to, Alli. The key is Chris had the room. Okay. The fans didn't know it, but Chris had the room. And this to me, Buddy and Alli, is the great unknown to me, because I'm not in the room and I'm not close to the team. Right. Does Mertz have the room? That if Billy were to pull Mertz, would the team basically look at Billy and go, "You're an idiot," and he would lose the team? Yeah. Or is the team, what people didn't know until after the fact was the team in Alabama in 2017 was like, why aren't we playing Tua? I mean, those 4 first-round picks at wide receiver in practice were yelling because they hated how Hurts was throwing the ball, and they desperately wanted Nick to put Tua in. And Nick nearly lost the team, and they all would have transferred if he had with Hurts through that title game. This, to me, is what we don't know. Is the team looking at Billy going, when are you going to play the kid? Or would the team look at Billy and go, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
Let me jump in there real fast on something that's important to know, because I followed that team real close that year and was working with Irwin on the book. And one of the things I can tell you is that it wasn't always 100% clear cut that Chris Leak was the man. He might have been the starting quarterback. There have been a couple of games like Meyer had a difficult time getting Leak to stick the ball in there on short yardage plays. And it was a key game late in the year when on 4th and 2 at the goal, 4th and goal to 2, whatever, that the Leak actually stuck it in there when he scored the touchdown and took a tough hit. And Meyer was so proud of him for doing that because he hadn't shown that kind of thing. And the second thing was in the FSU game, when the game was close late in the game, it was a timeout. And Leak called timeout and went to the sideline and talked to Urban. He said to Urban, let me run this drive. Let me have this drive. Let me take him down, coach, and we'll score. And you know what? He did it. He took him down the field and he showed leadership. That kind of leadership wasn't always there with Chris Leak, although he was a heck of a good quarterback. That's one. Secondly, earlier in the conversation, we talked about calling the plays. Was it different for Mertz than it was for Lagway? I don't care, because the kind of plays that Lagway runs aren't always called. His ability to run the football, his ability to adapt, to change, to make throws that really most people don't make. It's not about always the play call for him. He seems to find a way to get to the ball, get the ball to the best players. So that's what impresses me. I want to say those two things.
Well, and I agree with that. I think that he brings an element of being able to adapt on the fly that Mertz doesn't. But, I still would love to see what Mertz can do in an offense that's called differently as well. So, I think both of those things can be true at the same time. They didn't call it the same. And DJ Lagway is better at audibling, on the fly there. And that's the thing for me. But somebody commented Leak was a starter all 4 years. Yeah, he came in his freshman year he became the starter against Kentucky, I believe. Brock Berlin, we'd seen him. We saw him when Brock Berlin got hurt, I believe, but Kentucky's when he took the lead, as somebody, Gregory or whatever, commented there on the side. Yeah. And, the difference between Leak's leadership and Tebow's leadership is that Leak was a quiet leader. He led by example. He worked incredibly hard, but he's not the rah-rah guy on the sidelines. And Tim was that for sure. But he had the room, though, it just in such a different way than Tim commands a room. I don't know what Mertz and Lagway's personalities are like in the locker room, but I know they both are incredibly well respected and well liked. And I think both of them have handled this about as good as you possibly could. And it's almost that makes it better and makes it worse, if that makes sense, because the players don't want to pick a side on this because they do like and respect both of them as leaders. I think the biggest concern for me, and I don't know, buddy, if this is what you think or David, but it stresses me out to think about how Napier is going to call a game with two quarterbacks when I feel like he has a bad feel for the flow of a game when he's only worried about one quarterback.
That's a good point. We're not thrilled with his play calling with one. All of a sudden, is he going to find magic with two?
Right.
Al, I know you'll agree with me on this, though. The players know who should be playing. They do. The room
I agree.
who should be playing. So the players may respect both guys, but the whole truth serum deal. The players know who should be playing.
Yeah.
And up at this point in time, it's up for Billy and his staff to really know how the room feels. Because you're right. The fans want Lagway, just like they wanted Tebow.
That's right.
Urban knew, though, he can't pull that trigger unless it is bleeping obvious. Okay. And I think, this is Billy's career here, and not just in Florida. This is Billy's career. He's got to get this right. He's got to get it right Saturday, and he's got to win.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a BFD.
It's a big one. It's a huge one. And I've used this story a bunch of times. I apologize to people who have heard it so many times, but it's still the best story I know about competing quarterbacks. And David, you've been around long enough to know what his name is. His name was Steve DeBerg, okay? The journeyman backup quarterback, right? Playing, 5 teams. He was playing for the Broncos, starting and whenever the Broncos traded for Elway. And I was living in Denver at that time. You talk about a quarterback controversy. They wanted him to start the next day. They got it. They wanted Elway. And so that whole thing played out over the summer. And at one point in time, DeBerg was still the starter. We're getting close to the opening game against Pittsburgh. And we're talking to DeBerg about it, saying, well, what's it like with this generational talent behind you? He's got great talent. What's it like for you? And he said something so smart. He said, look, it's just a matter of time where Elway's talent overrides my experience. So now, does that time come here? Probably not, because it's different. And I think that's the question. If I told you, I said, look, you got a lot better chance of winning 5 or 6 games. If you start this guy, you're going to have to start him. And it's hard to do that when you got a quarterback like Mertz, who's been so loyal and so competitive and done nothing wrong.
Yeah, forget.
That doesn't matter.
That doesn't matter.
Right.
It's gotta listen. Right now, I think we'd all agree this team doesn't look like it's capable of going to Knoxville and winning. But this team is capable of winning the other 4 games before their bye.
Yeah, I agree. Let me
do
this real quick. This commercial real quick.
The right decision, because he's got to be 5-2 when he plays Georgia.
Yeah, that's a tall order right now, isn't it? Really tall. I want to tell folks about our fine sponsors, not the least of which is Meldon Law. Meldon Law have been around for a long time. They're going to be around for a long time. If you need legal advice or help, I encourage you to go online, look them up, check them out. Meldon Law, they won't back down. They'll take care of your business. If you have a current litigation going on, you're not happy with the action you're getting, do like you do in medicine. Get a second opinion from Meldon Law. It doesn't cost you anything. Find out if you're going on the right track. And I recently had Jeffrey Meldon do some legal work. And for me, it was spectacular. Loved it. And he's the kind of guy who does it right. He, of course, is a great Gator fan. Meldon Law, it won't back down. Coming up in a couple of minutes, we're going to talk to Kevin Brockway, who has this series out on 2-part backup quarterbacks. 2 quarterback system is what I'm trying to say. 2 quarterback system. If you start telling people saying, "Oh, well, that can't work," there's a guy living in Gainesville who'll tell you you're full of it. And we know who he is, Steve Spurrier. He lived off of that eventually. He played the entire season that way. We don't like it. I've heard you say, Alli, or others say 2 quarterbacks is no quarterback, etc. I think it could work in this situation. David, what do you think?
I think the quarterbacks, though, have to be. I don't think you can have the senior and the freshman and have a 2 quarterback system. I mean, help me out. When Steve did his 2 quarterback thing, weren't they kind of in the ballpark of one another?
Yes, they were.
Experience wise, and
yes, they're all the same class almost.
Yeah, I don't think you can do it with a senior and a freshman.
Perhaps, Alli?
A senior and a freshman have worked before. I don't know that I think that's my concern. I think that if you use Lagway, you use him as kind of a change of pace, but I almost feel like Lagway is a more mobile, better throwing version of Mertz. So I don't know that I think they're so different. I personally wouldn't use Lagway as a battering ram, which, like, when we think back to Tebow and Leak, that's kind of how Tim was used his first year. He wasn't asked to make the big throws. He was asked to bulldoze for the last, couple yards to get a first down each time. I don't know that that's how you want to use Lagway, the person that you're hanging your hat on for 2025. It could work. It's got to be the right person calling the plays for it to work. And that's where my main concern is. I do want to correct myself. Somebody commented and said, you're right, it was Ingle Martin, not Brock Berlin, but Ingle Martin was not a freshman at the same time as Leak. Ingle Martin was, I believe, a junior at that point. He's 2 years older than us, I think. So whoever corrected on the side, it was Ingle Martin. I don't know. I just kind of have this feeling of dread. And I think maybe, I don't know, maybe you guys have different opinions on this. I want to see how this works. How do they have it drawn up? Is it already scripted and we're going to go every other series? Is it this person's taking it on third downs? Like, how is this being broken up? Or is it, I think it's more likely to be Mertz until it isn't.
Yes, I'm with you, Alli. I think it's BS. I think he threw it out there to try to get A&M to spend a little bit of time during the week worried about maybe they're going to have to play Lagway and some of the things he did. But I'm with you, Alli. I think it's Mertz until he decides it's not.
Yeah, and I don't know that I'm saying that that's the right call. I just feel like in the way that Billy does things, that seems like the most likely Napier move there is that it's Mertz until it's not. You saw today they refused to put out the depth chart. And they said they're not going to now moving forward. They're just going to put out the injuries, which, is that gamesmanship? I haven't known Napier to be big on gamesmanship, but I thought
he said it was. He admitted it.
Do what? He said it was gamesmanship?
He's admitted to the words gamesmanship. Yes, he wants to get confused.
Which, I mean, great. Maybe we're turning over a new leaf here and we're trying some new things, but that is un-Napier-like, in the past. He's generally a pretty straight shooter about stuff like that. But
Alli, isn't the die cast, and David, when the cat's out of the bag. We've seen what this guy's got. If he goes in and doesn't play Lagway and they get beat, there's going to be some hell to pay about that. For the fans, it's going to be.
It's going to be bad, even if playing Mertz was the smart decision and they lose. No one's going to know that, right? Billy might know that, or the people that are inside the program might know that it was still smarter to play Mertz, but the fans won't know that. And what we saw last week doesn't make us think that. And it's going to be bad if he plays Mertz the majority of the time and they lose. It's going to be hard for him to recover from that.
David, and lost in all this, David, is the pure joy of seeing a real quarterback.
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, I get it where you're used to seeing Dinkin and Duncan and struggling to make big plays or, not even making big plays. And then all of a sudden, this breath of fresh air comes in. And let's face it, Gator fans are used to seeing the game a certain way. Their glory days, even what Urban did, that offense took a little getting used to for Gator fans. But the running...
People hated it until we won.
Exactly.
People hated it.
But also the running did set up when they threw the ball. They often threw the ball downfield, 20-plus yard plays, but they won but clearly the Florida fan grew up seeing Spurrier ball, and they want to see the ball go downfield. And it hasn't been for a long time. And so all of a sudden, this flower, this breath of fresh air starts chucking it all over the lot, and Gator fans start going, oh my goodness, he has 3 years before he can go pro. You mean this could be our offense? Really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, where do I sign up?
Yeah. So true. And it is a beautiful thing to watch. I mean, I don't know how surprised you guys were. I'm about as big a DJ Lagway fan as it could be. I have been. I expect him to play well. I had no idea he reached that level. I just didn't know he was that good.
I mean, this is a kid I've interviewed multiple times. I've interviewed his quarterback coach, his high school coach. I've watched all of his film. It's not surprising to me that this is the type of product that he put on the field. I think that he has the potential to be a generational talent. I want, no matter who the coach at Florida is, for us to retain him. I think, if Napier overcomes this and he's the coach in 2025, I think DJ Lagway is the person that could help him elevate this, get it to the next level. I believe that if Napier's not the guy, that DJ Lagway helps attract a big name coach, and that this is somebody that can help hold this class together recruiting wise. The guys that are already there, I think people want to play for him. I think high flying coaches, high flying offensive coaches salivate over the idea of him. Could you imagine Lane Kiffin and DJ Lagway? Like, whew, the amount of points that would be scored, he is an exceptional talent, and I'm excited to watch his career, the next 3 years. I just also don't want us to damage him too early.
Who was it? Vanderbilt that ran out of fireworks. They scored so many times. Remember the other day they just apologized. We ran out of fireworks.
Fireworks, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I think the thing is, there is some hope. There is some hope. There's talent in the house, and I don't know those receivers. What we saw there, that get a bunch of receivers, that's some talent now, and they've been there the whole time. But Shane Matthews is always railing about throw the ball down the field, and look what they got. They got some amazing talent, and that combination. Are they good enough to do it against A&M? David, is this team just a cut above? Was Florida going to be physically beat up now by this team? Are we ahead of ourselves on this? Or is this legitimately a team that we think it might be, no matter who the caliber of the competition? The execution, the way they carry themselves was impressive. Which team are we going to see, David?
Well, I just don't know that the Gators at the point of attack are at the upper echelon of the SEC. I really don't. I mean, offensive and defensive lines, I on their best day, I think the Gators right now are middle of the pack in the SEC. So I think it's going to be tough to win the 8+ games that fans really want this year with that schedule. The fact that they're not yet good enough at the point of attack, in my opinion. I do want to address what Mark said, that, Mullen's first 2 years, they threw it around. That's true. Kyle Trask and company did throw it around. That seems like 8-10 years ago, Mark. I got to be honest. That's how rough these last 2-3 years have been. But you are right. With Kyle Trask, they did chuck a lot. Okay. And Gator fans loved it, by the way. Okay. They did. Okay. Now, granted, it was nice winning 10 games and finally beating Georgia, but they loved, the style of play. I just think, first off, if you go with Lagway, Mertz is done. That's, number one. Not that anybody cares, but I'm just saying. That's why, to me, I think you can go Lagway in the third quarter if you have to. I think you can go Lagway even against Mississippi State. Okay, I really do. That's the only thing. And once again, to me, that's all about the room. Okay, does Billy lose the team? Does he lose credibility with the team if, after preaching everything that he preached all offseason, all right, the first sign of a pothole, even though it's a big pothole that's going to send your car to the shop, and need to get, a realignment, at the first sign of a big pothole, that he changes everything that he's been preaching about for 2.5 years.
Yeah, and the crazy thing about the pothole too is that I don't really think you can blame Graham Mertz for the pothole. Did he play great against Miami? No, that was probably his worst game as a Gator. But I feel like there was just so many other issues there that the quarterback is far from the very biggest issue that we had in that game. Defense was the very biggest issue that we had in that game. And so it does feel weird to think we're pulling a guy not because the guy in front of him actually messed up,
Well, we'll say good evening to Kevin Brockway from the Gainesville Sun, who has a piece out on the 2-quarterback system. We'll talk about that. But first, let's do a little quickie poll. If we had to make a guess right now and said, okay, how many minutes will each quarterback play? And will Lagway get a series or more? Let's take a quick head count. I'll start out by saying I believe Lagway gets at least one series, maybe two. And of course, depends upon how long they hold the ball. He's got to give him a look or two. If he doesn't, there are going to be people unhappy. So I just say that Lagway gets, let's just say, 8 snaps, and we'll see what happens. That's my take on it. David, how about you? How many snaps do you have Lagway?
I've already said I think Billy was mostly just throwing that out there, I think, to try to throw A&M off a little bit. To me, if he puts Lagway in the game, I think he needs to keep him in the game, to be honest with you. So my answer would be either 0 or like 35.
Really? Wow. All right, Alli?
I think we see him, but I think we see him after the game's decided one way or the other.
That'd be a mistake.
I agree, but I do think that's what happens.
Just got to give him a look by halftime at least. Got to give him a look. All right, Kevin, good evening. What do you think?
I think third series in the game, you're going to see him. And I think that was Billy's track record at Louisiana in 2018. And I think based on what we're hearing, the fact that Lagway's gotten some first-team reps in practice this week, I think Graham's on a pretty short leash, to be honest with you. I mean, you can't deny what your eyes tell you. Yes, this is Samford, but I also think as well the fact that 6 pass plays of 30 yards or more when Florida had only 14 all of last season tells you a little something about what kind of talent DJ Lagway has in the downfield throwing game. So I think you're going to see him a little bit, but I think it's going to be a feel thing too. I think it's just going to depend on how the game goes.
David, I think it was you that said, I believe you said this, if you start Lagway, you have no place to go, sort of. If you start Mertz.
Yeah. I mean, if you start Lagway, there's no reason to take him out of a game the rest of the year if he gets hurt. I mean, that means that Mertz's time as a starter is over and you're turning it over to Lagway. My thought is that you can turn it over to him in the third quarter. You can turn it over to him in Starkville. Yeah, the fans may be angry that you waited 2 or 4 quarters, but they'll be just happy that he's the starter. And if Lagway is endorsing Napier and staying a Gator and what have you, that's probably the best thing Billy would have going for him. But I just don't think you make that move first snap of the game unless you're really willing to put your career on that move. That's all. You need to beat A&M, and if you do, you can be 5-2, same position as last year, playing the gauntlet down the stretch, which, by the way, doesn't look as difficult as it did on paper a month ago.
I just think everything that we have seen from Coach Napier during his time here is that he is conservative in the way that he plays. So I think it will come down to the fact that, yes, DJ Lagway has a higher ceiling, but I think he believes Graham Mertz has a higher floor. And because we have seen him play tight, play conservative the entire time he has coached at the University of Florida, I think that is what he's looking at in determining.
For what it's worth, I just came back from media availability, and both Billy Napier and Hayden Hansen said that Graham Mertz has looked really sharp this week. So it doesn't look like a guy that's come off a concussion has picked up where he's left off. And basically from what we're hearing, he's getting a lot of the first team reps. So I think it'll definitely be Graham Mertz to start. But I do think that if the offense struggles early, there will be some grumbling in the crowd. And I think Billy will, maybe won't hesitate to. But again, it's going to be a feel thing. Steve Spurrier said on RUF on his radio show. It's pretty simple. You play one guy. If he's going well, you stick with him. If not, then you go to the other guy. And that's how he used to do it back in the 90s. And that might be a good word of advice for Billy Napier.
Well, he's always compared it to baseball. If you got a better pitcher, you put him in, whatever. And I'm going to take a quick hit here on our sponsors. Thanks to our fine guest tonight, Kevin Brockway joins us, against our son David Moulton, Miller Moulton, and Alli Peek Wilbur. We'll peek inside the what is it called? Florida Gators. I forgot now. Anyway, her podcast is well known. She gets hundreds of thousands of people. I want to say that I thank our sponsors, particularly Titan MRI, and they do some terrific things in our community. If you need an MRI, this is the place to call and check, because they'll custom make your appointment for the daytime or the nighttime if you can't leave work. If you have no insurance, they'll make it so you can use cash or card, and they want you to have a comfortable experience in getting an MRI, which can be very uncomfortable. So check them out if you need an MRI right there in North Central Florida, TitanMRI.com. All right, guys, let's talk about the two-quarterback system. Like I said, Spurrier always believed if you're in baseball, if you got a better pitcher, you put him in. I've seen him bench Heisman Trophy winners if they're going right. It's a little bit different here because, as David points out, and you got a freshman and a senior, it's a little different. Is this a good time, to start the two-quarterback system, or will it just evolve, David?
Well, I know Alli pointed out that the freshman senior thing can work, but I think we went over, it worked in 06 because the freshman had a specific role to play. I just don't know if it works here, because in theory, when you're putting the freshman in, you're putting them in to, hey, go run the team, the whole playbook, and so I don't know. To me, Spurrier and Tom Landry, are the only two that have been able to really pull off a successful two-quarterback system, unless there's one that I'm forgetting.
Alli?
I think that a two-quarterback system can work. I just don't know that I believe a two-quarterback system can work in Billy Napier's offense.
All right, Kevin, you wrote about it. Talk about it.
I kind of like that, Alli. That's interesting. No, I think that obviously, it did work for Steve Spurrier. It worked for Urban Meyer, as David alluded to, in a different way, and bringing him in as a change of pace and runner. I think what's been interesting about DJ Lagway so far is we haven't really seen that much of the second element of the dual threat in his game, and there have been some questions about his shoulder and his health a little bit in that regard. So, I mean, how much do you see him run in a game like this against Texas A&M, which does, by the way, have a very suspect run defense? That's another factor in this game, and we could see Billy leaning on Montrell Johnson more than anyone in this game as a result of that. But at the same time, I do think it can work if deployed properly, and if the players know their role too. That was another big thing that Tim Tebow mentioned when I talked to him before the season. I think the players kind of have to know what to expect, what they're going to be doing. If you leave them in the dark a little bit and just kind of surprise them, that doesn't work as well. And I think the proof will be in the pudding. I mean, the one concern about Lagway before the season began was turnovers. They were throwing a lot of picks and false scrimmages. So far, we've seen him take care of the ball okay. He did throw the interception against Miami. It was a little bit of a fluke play. But he took care of the ball pretty well against Samford. Let's see what he does against an SEC defense in that regard as well.
He took care of the ball against Samford, and I don't think the Miami one we get to count on him, because we couldn't recreate that if we tried 100 times. But I will say there were let's say 3 times that he threw into triple coverage against Samford, and an SEC defense would have come down with those balls. And I think that there was a few times where he didn't necessarily make the right read, and it worked out against inferior opponents. And so then we celebrate this as a big success. But I think when they went back and watched film, they were probably like, hey, your intermediate guys who you should have hit, you made this more complicated by growing to this guy. There's room for growth there. He was phenomenal. It was fun to watch. He's a unique talent, but it wasn't a perfect game either. And I do think that the same game played against much tougher competition, we see some of those mistakes that maybe Samford wasn't good enough to capitalize on.
I think, Alli, the one thing we can't deny, though, that DJ does certainly better than Graham Mertz is a downfield passing game.
Oh, absolutely.
14 versus 6, and that really opens up the defense when you have that deep ball element. And that's what the fans enjoy too, right? The fans have been clamoring at the Swamp for years for a downfield passing game, and you've got it with this guy. And it was pretty electric in there Saturday, albeit against Samford, but it was certainly a lot of fun and entertaining. And I think as DJ Lagway continues to grow and develop, and if you can get him and put him in those successful positions, particularly play action, I think that's really going to help this offense. If you can do it strategically throughout the course of some of these SEC games coming up, it certainly would be the quick strike would certainly be an element that he could provide as a change of pace compared to Graham Mertz.
We talk about Chris Leak a lot on this episode, and I think DJ throws the prettiest ball I've seen since Chris Leak, and I will maintain that Chris Leak throws a prettier ball than Trask or Will Greer or Anthony Richardson, and that's the gold standard for me of the last 20-ish years. And I think DJ throws a ball as beautiful as Leak, which is about as high a compliment as I personally can give you. But this is just not an ideal situation for Napier to have to manage at this moment in his career, especially.
You have to think about, are you throwing the guy to the wolves too at the same time? I don't know about Trask. Now, Trask threw a nice ball. I will always defend him.
Beautiful. I just don't know
and I know Chris threw a great ball, and he did. But in some ways, I won't say more catchable. It was a softer ball that Trask threw, and Leak threw a nice tight spiral and put some velocity on it. So he was great, terrific. Anyway, here this brings up this. Sometimes it takes an unusual act to get a guy into the game. Remember, Kyle Trask was dying on the vine until what happened to Kentucky. Next thing you know, he's in the game and he never came out again. And consequently, it was because of the injury he got his chance. What do we have here? Well, we have same thing. Lagway gets a chance because of the injury. So sometimes coaches can overthink a situation when they're forced to make a decision. Sometimes it turns out okay.
But with the Mullen, Trask, and Franks comparison, I feel like everybody remembers the second half of the story and nobody ever remembers the first half of the story, which was that Trask was beating Franks until Trask got injured. And then Franks became the starter, won 10 games in Mullen's first year. And then Mullen's placed in a situation where he knows Trask is better, but he's got a quarterback who won 10 games. And it's incredibly difficult to go away from a quarterback that wins 10. So Franks starts. And then honestly, the best thing that probably happened to Mullen, and I would never want a player to be hurt, but the decision was taken out of Mullen's hands at that point.
Yeah,
and then the guy who was talented. But the initial decision was also forced because of injuries, if that makes sense. And I feel like everyone's like, oh, and he went with Franks over Trask and forgets the lead up to why Franks ended up being the guy in the first place. But it did work out.
Which brings up the other elephant in the room, which is the offensive line and the fact that Graham Mertz has been knocked out of his last 2 games due to injury, a collarbone injury, where he did kind of scramble on that. But the Miami game, so I think the offensive line and protection too, and you have DJ Lagway, who is probably a little more athletic and can elude the rush a little bit more than Graham Mertz as well. Adds that element. If you remember in 2012. For example, Brett Peace went with Jeff Driscoll over Jacoby Brissett because they thought the offensive line was suspect and Driscoll was a more mobile option.
Well, and to me, I don't know the answer to this question. Do you want the veteran Mertz because that offensive line could struggle against A&M's defensive line, and you have to make sure that the line calls are the best, that Mertz will give you the best chance to be in the right plays at the right time, or is the best way to combat the fact that you may at best get a stalemate up front to have the mobility that Lagway brings. I don't know the answer to that. To me, that's why the coaches are making the money that they are. What's better here? The right line calls, the right play calls, or let's just put the more talented guy out there. He'll overcome what he doesn't know with his athleticism and his arm talent.
I think it's fascinating too. And I think too, David, again, this Texas A&M defense is susceptible to run too. So I think maybe you counter that too by getting Montrell Johnson established early, who's your best running back, who by the way, has looked pretty good the first 2 weeks of the season coming off that knee scope. And I think you're going to see a lot more of him than what you think in this game to kind of counter that pass rush that Texas A&M has and keep them a little honest. And Texas A&M's had problems tackling this year, and Scooby Williams is one of their starters, and we know well here some of the issues he had tackling as well. So they've had some problems in the secondary there too.
Kevin, I'll ask you and Alli, do you have confidence that the offensive line can be good enough run blocking so that tailback can establish himself and take the pressure off? I mean, they got to win, they got to get more than a stalemate up front against the A&M front. Do you have confidence they can do it?
I think so. I think this is different from Miami. Like I said, I think the Texas A&M front seven is good, a good pass rush, but I think too, maybe the tape shows they're a little undisciplined in that regard and don't stay in the run lane. So I think they are going to be able to establish this run. I mean, Texas A&M is, I think, 110th in the country right now, 188 yards per game allowed on the ground. So the track record tells you that you can run on this team. I think it's a lot different of a front seven in that regard than, say, Miami.
I agree with that. And I also, add that Texas A&M, I think, has given up more big plays than anybody else in the country, or they're the bottom five. Like they've given up a lot, and it's mainly been big run plays. So I think it would behoove Florida to attempt to establish the run first. This is also, this is a defensive line that was originally talked about as it could be one of the best in the country. They have 1 sack so far through 2 games, which is not obviously particularly impressive. And they have really been penalized kind of a lot through these 2 games as well. So honestly, the safest option at this point is to establish the run, see if you can make that work. And then maybe you don't even have to rely on your quarterback all that much either way. But I'm with Kevin. I think there's an opportunity to run the ball here.
And I might add, there's people out there who believe the short pass game can really be the same thing as running the football, as we saw sometimes with Moulton, as we saw sometimes with Spurrier. But you have to have the quarterback and you have to have the system formation to do that with. So that combination doesn't seem to exist right now. It's going to be a tough game. I think it's going to be a tough out for Florida. I don't know that I like your chances against them. I know A&M had a knockdown drag out with Notre Dame. I know they've had disappointment, and Mike Elko's a heck of a defensive coach. I worry about this game, and they're going to need a little magic from somebody. If it's going to have to be Lagway, it'll be Lagway. They got to find a way to, like David, like you said, they got to find a way to win this game.
Does it scare anybody that we've got 4 guys on their sideline who were in our locker room last year? Think about what the Miami defensive coordinator said about us on Monday of last week. Yeah. He said that they watched film from the year before and they knew the 5 or 7 plays we were most likely to call, and that's exactly what happened. Now you've got 2 coaches and 2 players who sat in those defensive meetings and played against this offense, for multiple years. Like that alone leaves me a little uneasy.
Even more reason to have a quarterback that can make a lot of plays and can run with his legs as well as his arm.
And that there's not a whole lot of film on.
Yes.
Still a little uneasy also about the defense as well, even though they showed something against Samford a little bit better, but only 2 turnovers in 2 games. And let's see if they can come with that physicality against an SEC level competition. That's the other big question too, I think, is how they start. Now Connor Wagman is, he struggled a little bit early this season, but the defense has to show as well in this kind of game and show that they've developed and shown some growth. Because certainly, for Miami to put up 41 against them in the opener, that I think that still leaves a taste in some people's mouths. Has this defense, really improved with some of the additions, Ron Roberts and Will Harris and Gerald Chapman.
Got to have some of those guys get home. Ron Roberts' defense is fine, but I got to see some pressure on the quarterback, and I haven't seen that yet. So some last week, but it was against an inferior team. They've got to find a way to get the hands. The edge rushers have got to get home. And they could get physically beaten up by A&M. So I don't know. I'm not real optimistic about this, but it's only Wednesday, and things can change. Minds can change. We'll see what we got here. Give me your final 30 seconds, Alli and David, and then Kevin. We'll say goodnight.
This is going to be a tough one. And I do think that the key to this for Florida is being able to establish the run and playing mistake-free football. I think it's a close game. I think the Gators have the ability to pull it out. Whether or not that happens obviously remains to be seen. But I'm going to be confident that Florida can win in a close one.
Mr. Moulton.
Absolute must win. If they lose, he has to turn to Lagway just to save his job and the program and his viability as head coach, to be honest. I'm with Alli. My gut says, A&M doesn't go on the road and beat decent or better teams very often.
They have their last 10 road games.
Right. So, I'll say Florida close, but it's a must win.
Third game in a row in the swamp, Kevin.
Yep. I remember when Christian Kirk came in here, 2017 in the swamp, and they weren't supposed to punt to him, and he broke their hearts, and they punted to him, and he got the game-winning touchdown, and now he's playing for the Jag. I think that was Texas A&M's last visit here. I don't think it's going to happen again. I think Florida's going to find a way to win this game 24-16. I think the defense is going to show a little bit of improvement. I think Montrell Johnson is going to run the ball pretty well, and I think both quarterbacks are going to play and make an impact in this game.
Kevin Brockway of the Gainesville Sun, David Moulton of Moulton and Miller, or Miller and Moulton, and Alli Peek Wilbur from A Peek Inside the Gators. Terrific job, folks. Good panel, good discussion, big crowd tonight. Appreciate you all. Thanks. All right, folks, wrap up by saying thank you to our sponsors tonight. Mellon Law, of course. They won't back down. Our friends at TitanMRI.com and the ones we saved for last, which is Redstar Medical Research, doing a terrific job as a stakeholder in downtown Ocala, also looking out for your health and mine in the sense that trying to find better ways to treat you for your illnesses. How they do that is they have these things called clinical trials. They want you to take part in these if you can. You can go sign up at redstar.net. And if there's a particular trial, they have them on everything from asthma to skin issues or whatever. Check them out and find out if you're suited for it. If you qualify, you could receive time and travel compensation. They're looking for volunteers to come be a part of this so they can find better ways to treat us in our communities. That's Redstar Medical Research, seeking tomorrow's answers to the health questions of today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching tonight, folks. We thank Brendan for driving the boat tonight. Help us through a night when we needed that help. He's always there. Thank you for that. Don't forget, tomorrow night, we're back home with the orange and blue Bloods, and they'll be joining us right here on the show, our usual cast. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Good night, everybody.